So within the workbook, what we've tried to do is make things a little bit more interactive in how we come through and how we start to get a little bit of engagement. So we went through one of these a couple of weeks ago with Stephanie and her presentation. So I'm just going to run through the case study for you. So after a medical administration error at a large city hospital conducted an investigation. During the investigation, they discovered a nurse had made an error who had worked more than 240 hours in that month. So you can do a bit of maths on this, and if you divide 240 by 8, it works out at 30 days. So she's actually worked 30 days in the month, which is the average. And then you can actually divide that by 12. So she's worked 20 days. So you've worked 20 days of 12-hour shifts. So we think we're tired when Christine started this session off by saying that she was being on transport, going to work, working a full day and then coming home. And imagine doing that now of actually working and then doing your transport home and driving after that. It becomes a long time. So what they're saying here is she worked many long shifts. Some were 10 hours at night and some were 12 hours during the day. The nurse had been required to work a number of night shifts at short notice to fill in for absences of other staff. A unit manager had not been able to call on agency staff or casuals because of the budget. So they're actually making do with people who will just keep going until they actually break. So for an entire month, the nurse did not get 2 days off in a row. The shifts she worked over the month were often on what they call a backward rotation. So instead of you finishing at let's say 10 o'clock at night on an afternoon shift, and then come Monday, you actually go into the next day shift period, which will take you through. They actually work backwards. So she'd be on night shift after finishing at 10 o'clock at night. She'd actually start a night shift at 10 o'clock at night with those rotations. Following the investigation, the hospital organised a risk assessment to be conducted to ensure the situation could not happen again. So within Christine's presentation, she's put a lot of tips in there. We've shown you some of the plans. Erin's given a good insight into how fatigue's been managed at her project. So the question is, what processes should you use or would you use to prevent this from occurring? So we've got a few minutes left yet. So I just want to discuss how you'd prevent this from happening. So I'm just going to turn it over to yourselves now as to how you'd prevent this from happening and this error from occurring.
I'd probably start off by having a roster of casuals or excess staff so we can access in case that we do need them, in case there are issues with current staff. So then we don't have other staff on site carrying the slack or carrying somebody else's burden.
So that's the emergency list that you actually have, the on-call roster or whatever you'd like to call it. Yeah.
Clive, can I say something?
Yes, of course.
Yeah, thanks. I think medication administration error is really, really very common in the healthcare sector and in the aged care settings. There are so many factors that could be attributed to that. And one of them apparently is going to be things like this fatigue management, where someone has to work multiple shifts, amongst other things could be the processes in place. I remember my place of work, one of the things we do is once you are exceeding 70 hours for the fortnight, it is mandatory to inform your supervisor for any available shift, and they really have to work that out to see how it's going to impact on your own body. Then when it comes to medication administration, it's really important that two people have to be there at the same time to agree and be sure that the right dose, the right medication given at the right time, through the right route is given. And at the end of the day, both of you have to put your signature in and then put the time there as well. So other things could just be that, where you put the medication is another thing. It shouldn't be something other people can just have quick access to. Do you want to put it in the locker under key? Who's in charge of the key? Who is the person responsible for the drug administration? So I think sometimes the processes the work puts in place would be who's in charge, who is giving, who is take records, and then how do you prevent people from having access to medications?
Yeah. So a lot of good points in there, Timothy, and particularly from a medical point of view, having the two eyes who actually review, and a lot of people, when they do come around and give you medication in hospital, there's always two people rather than just the one person, because one person dispenses the medication, the second person then distributes that to the patient, and the first person's actually recording what that medication is and what the dosage is, what they're actually taking. But when it comes down to one person, and particularly in this case study, these things do happen. And whether it's for financial issues, because they can't actually afford to bring people in, or it's because the person wanted the extra money in the first place. So I go back a long time when I first started in the building game, and if you only worked a 5-day week, you could get by. But it didn't actually give you any luxuries. So we always used to work the Saturdays, and that gave you the life's luxuries then, because you could earn the extra money. It was the overtime that actually went through. There's a term what came through then of being the needy and the greedy. So some people didn't just want to work the Saturday morning, they also wanted to work all day Sunday at the same time. So there's a balance of work-life expectancy and what you need to have. Are you lazy if you only work 5 days? Are you greedy if you actually work the 7 days? Or is it a needs must because we've actually got to do these particular hours? So what we're trying to look at now, particularly with this case study, is what processes and systems would you have in place to prevent this happening? If you are the employer at this particular time, what processes would you now adapt? So they talk about doing a risk assessment in here. Why was there not a risk assessment done in the first place to prevent a working these hours? So who monitors the timesheets? Have we got actual adequate resources in for staffing levels, for absenteeism? Who manages the financial budget of being able to bring in outside staff? Is there any audits conducted on a regular basis to look at extended hours of work? Is there an open reporting culture looking at fatigue management that you can say, sorry, and we'll look at that last slide, what Christina presented then, and it says, no, I'm not ill, I'm just tired. I'm really just tired. And being able to actually have that open reporting culture. Do we actually plan for the number of hours that people work, or is it just expected that we turn up at 7 and 8 o'clock in the morning, or 9 o'clock for a shop worker, and we just work till the hours what people expect us to do? Is there any communication of that when you actually first start your job? Because I know in my terms and conditions, it said you'd work 38 hours a week and any hours to suit the project. So it didn't say that you could work up to 72 or 84 or whatever it said. It would be any hours to suit the project. So what systems, and there's another 2 case studies that we actually want you to look at within the workbook, just to go through. So what systems would you actually bring into place to prevent issues like this occurring? Yeah. So this is the mindset that we actually need to get you in as safety professionals, in being able to understand those systems. Now, we've covered quite a lot tonight in this session that Christine's presented, and I'll just wrap that up now. So any questions from yourselves before we just move on to that stage?
Clive, just one for me. I should actually touch base with this anyway, but I know when I was reading the fatigue management policy for Novarel, it's recently been updated, and it basically said something about how there needs to be a suitable gap between shift times, between going from nights to days, not the other way around, because if you go from a day to a night shift, you've obviously got that break in between. But I know if you're going from a night shift to a day shift, is it just a minimum of a 12-hour break period, or should you allow more time between a shift change from a night to a day?
So we're trying to make sure there's a minimum 24 hours. Where possible, you should actually build in a 48-hour change window, Erin,
Okay.
to within that. And particularly, this is where the fatigue model, you can actually play with that to see how it actually picks up that spike with the logarithms, what's actually being used in the background. So, as I said, minimum 24 hours. I said 12 hours before. Minimum 24 hours, but you should actually be trying to work on a 48-hour period when people come off a roster. It gives them time to settle down. It gives them time to actually change the eating habits, getting ready for the next shift pattern of what they're actually going to be doing. Very hard to turn a 24-hour round sometimes, particularly when you're going from from days to nights. As it actually works in. Yeah.
Cool. Thank you.
Anybody else? Okay, so we're just basically banged on time. I'd like to thank Christine for a sterling performance tonight. So very well done, Christine. Well put together and well delivered. I just want to summarise some of the things up of what Christine had talked through. So she started to talk about what fatigue was and an overview of the area, some of the legislation that it actually covers with fatigue and part of that, what fatigue is and some of the causes of fatigue and the symptoms, and particularly where there's a bit of a discussion there about shift rostering and recovery time. We looked at the signs and symptoms of fatigue and what indicates that you're actually getting it. There was a very good video regarding the microsleeps, and a number of us have put our hand up that we've all experienced those at some stage of getting from A to B and not particularly knowing that route, whether we've gone through a red light or a speed camera or overtaking a bus or past somebody who was stood in the middle of the island on there. We also had a very good discussion on how we actually manage your own fatigue and some of the things which came through regarding exercise, turning off electronics, looking at sleep recovery and catching up on that. So sleep recovery is really important when it comes to this. There was also an area there on good tips of what to do with that. We looked at the fatigue management plan and what's incorporated in that. Now, the rail jobs in particular have to have a rail safety management plan for fatigue. Some of your other industries may just have a risk assessment process within that rather than an actual plan. How often is fatigue discussed? So a number of questions that Christine profiled there of is fatigue discussed with yourselves? What processes are in place? Erin gave a very good example of what's in place there at her works. And then we've just gone through the case study of presenting and how we actually manage some of those systems and processes. So I'd like to say really well done, Christina. Fabulous presentation.
Thank you.
And well done.